South Africa, a land of beauty and diversity, but also a land haunted by a deep scar. A scar that left generations of Black South Africans in pain, grief, and struggle. This is the story of apartheid, a regime of division, of inequality, and the fight for justice that would ultimately change the world. This is the story of a nation broken apart and the human spirit that refused to be silenced. To truly understand apartheid, we have to go back, way back, before the laws were written and the policies enforced. South Africa has always been a melting pot of cultures. The Khoisan were the first inhabitants, followed by the Bantu-speaking peoples who migrated from Central Africa centuries ago. Then came the European settlers, the Dutch in 1652, and later the British, who clashed with local populations for control. By the 1800s, South Africa was a battleground for more than just land. It was a battleground of identity. The British and the Afrikaners, descendants of the Dutch settlers, both fought to dominate. But beneath this European conflict, Black South Africans, who made up the vast majority of the population, were slowly being pushed into the margins. Imagine living in a world where your land, culture, and future were being written out of history. This was the reality for Black South Africans long before apartheid became law. Fast forward to the early 20th century. In 1910, South Africa gained independence from British rule. But it was an independence only for the white minority. The seeds of apartheid had already been planted in the form of segregation laws. The Native Lands Act of 1913 forced Black South Africans onto reserves, restricting their movement and eroding their rights. It was a time of deep inequality. Wealth, education, and political power were reserved for whites. But it wasn't called apartheid yet. It was simply the way things were, a world divided by race. Think of it like a fence going up between neighbors, but only one side has the right to build and expand while the other is slowly fenced in, piece by piece. And then, in 1948, came apartheid. The National Party, elected to power by a white-only electorate, officially institutionalized racial segregation, codifying it into every aspect of life. Black, colored, and Indian South Africans were stripped of their rights, forced into separate schools, buses, hospitals, and even cities. The infamous pass laws made it illegal for Black people to travel without permits. But this is where the story shifts. This is where Black South Africans, despite being oppressed, began to rise. The African National Congress, or ANC, and other movements, with leaders like Nelson Mandela, Albertina Sisulu, and Walter Sisulu, launched protests and campaigns for equality. The 1952 Defiance Campaign, the 1955 Congress of the People. These were moments of hope, where the masses gathered to say, "We are not invisible. We will not be silent." Imagine being told where you can live, who you can love, and whether or not you can move freely in your own country. It would spark a fire in anyone, but the apartheid regime was not willing to budge, and with each peaceful protest, the government responded with violence. Sharpeville, 1960. A peaceful protest turned into a massacre. 69 black South Africans shot dead, hundreds more injured. It became clear that the road to freedom would not be easy. By the 1970s and 1980s, the world began to take notice of the horrors of apartheid. International pressure mounted, with boycotts, sanctions, and growing media attention. But within South Africa, the struggle intensified. The Soweto uprising of 1976 was a turning point. Thousands of black students took to the streets, protesting the introduction of Afrikaans as the medium of instruction in schools. But the regime met them with bullets. Hector Peterson, a 13-year-old boy, became the face of the uprising after being shot and killed. His lifeless body was carried through the streets in an image that shocked the world. It was as though apartheid had pushed the final button, forcing children to fight for their future, their lives. This period was marked by rising tension, mass arrests, and the infamous Robben Island prison, where Nelson Mandela and many other leaders were held for decades. Then in the early 1990s, something changed. The pressure, both domestic and international, became too much. The apartheid government could no longer hold back the tide of resistance. In 1990, Nelson Mandela was released from prison after 27 years. The world watched as he walked free, a symbol of hope and resilience. Negotiations began between the government and the ANC, and in 1994, the unthinkable happened. South Africa held its first multiracial elections, and Nelson Mandela was elected the country's first black president. It was the end of apartheid, but the beginning of a new struggle, to heal the wounds of a divided nation. Today, South Africa continues to face the challenges of inequality and reconciliation. The legacy of apartheid runs deep, but so too does the resilience of its people. The grief may never fully disappear, but the hope for a better future remains. Apartheid may have ended, but the journey for true freedom is ongoing. South Africa, like so many nations, has a past filled with pain. But it also has a future shaped by those who dared to resist, who dared to dream of equality. Apartheid left a scar, but it did not defeat the spirit of the people. And that spirit of freedom, resilience, and unity will never be forgotten.
Ngosi to support right.